Jess Pettitt here, and now we are talking about Chapter 29, the Federal Election Commission, which I'm not going to lie is something I stupidly thought I would know what it was going to be talking about and was woefully inaccurate. But luckily, we're with my friend and actual family member, Bridget Claney. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this. And buckle up, everybody, because Bridget is actually like an expert. So I am going to just sit back. Bridget, why don't you tell us what is the Federal Election Commission for those like me who maybe thought they did know, and or most people who probably absolutely don't know?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, almost nobody really knows what the Federal Election Commission does because it's not very public and it doesn't always do very much. Watching this last election, you would be forgiven for thinking that there just aren't really rules about what you can do when it comes to raising money and spending money for campaign finance. And that's not true. There are rules, and the FEC is in charge of enforcing those rules. The recommendations that are in this chapter are basically geared toward encouraging the FEC to do even less enforcement that it's already doing. Now, to
Which is
understand,
almost nothing.
which is very little. And so to understand of what they're recommending for this board and why it has an impact and sort of what the bigger picture is with this chapter, I think it's good to start out with just talking about what the FEC is and how it's set up.
Perfect.
Like I said, yeah, the FEC is primarily their major job is enforcing campaign finance law. And campaign finance law is very complicated, not only for laypersons, kind of for everyone. In fact, one of the stranger arguments in this chapter is that candidates shouldn't be held accountable for breaking campaign finance laws if the laws are too complicated for them to understand. That is an argument that will not save you if the IRS tries to audit you, but it will save you if you're a candidate and you're,
What's
excuse
funny
me.
is I was actually going to compare to how it talks that when it does talk about the IRS and tax laws, the whole goal is to make tax laws or tax rules significantly easier because no one understands them. And then if they're easier, then you wouldn't have to spend so much money on staff to investigate people who make IRS mistakes. And I just want to point that out that you go after them even though they are complicated. But finance laws, you shouldn't have to go after anybody because they're too complicated. That's the kind of logic that is very present in this entire document.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I was going to say, so what is interesting is that the chapter starts off stating the Federal Election Commission is basically the protector of the Bill of Rights around politics. And that includes political speech, political activity by citizens, candidates, and parties, and volunteer membership organizations that then also can influence public policy issues. There are 6 commissioners. There are only allowed to have 3 people from individual parties present on the commissioners. And there's so much, like even there's a comment that Bridget and I were talking before we hit record. The author talks about himself in third person without even identifying that he is actually talking about himself, which is a thing that's pretty fascinating. The current 6 sitting people, to my understanding, is that they are staggered terms of 6 years, and when it expires, the president is supposed to replace them. And if the president doesn't replace them, they get to stay on. So there are currently 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats up for potential reappointment. And generally speaking, it is just known that because Trump is a Republican, Trump would potentially come up with 5 different people to be on this particular body. 3 would be Republican, 2 could be Democrat or independent or something. But you're not supposed to have more than 3 Republicans. And one of those Democrats' terms expired in 2007. That was not a minute ago, but it's still there. And the person who wrote this article, who is talking about themselves, says that Harry Reid, the Democrat from Nevada, is the only person who ever refused one of the nominees for the FEC by breaking the protocol of you just approve a bipartisan 3-by-3 matchup. And it's because Harry Reid refused to vote for the author of this chapter.
Correct. Yeah, the author of this chapter is the only person who's been rejected for an FEC seat. And the 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats thing is interesting because the rule is you can't have more than 3 people from any one party. Now, it's always before been 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, and Republicans appoint Democrats when it's a Democratic seat that needs to be refilled, and the same for Republicans. It's, a matter of political diplomacy. We know that Trump does not care about or probably even understand political diplomacy or how to use it. And so the biggest danger with the FEC would be that Trump appoints people who are not Republicans, but who are also not Democrats. People who are independents or people who are libertarians. Basically, he gets around, what is supposed to be a rule creating a bipartisan commission. And we all know that he will cut corners and cheat when he can. And so that's something that, that might happen. Even without that, though, even if we end up with, as we have right now, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, there's a major enforcement problem here. And that is that in order to move forward with an action, so how it happens is that somebody brings a complaint to the FEC saying this candidate or this organization is breaking campaign finance laws. And then the FEC votes on whether to take action and try to enforce against the person that the complainant is complaining about, or they decide not to take action. They vote on that, and in order to take action, you have to have 4 votes. So at least one person has to cross a party line to vote for enforcement. In the past, this has sometimes happened. More recently, it hasn't happened a whole lot. And so there's a weird kind of stalemate here. And they're talking in this article a little bit elliptically, but they're talking about this quite a bit. Because what has happened is you have a third party bringing a complaint saying candidate X is, maybe we should use candidate Y. We're not talking about X, the thing that's actually called Twitter. But candidate Y.
Although, touche.
I mean, that's true. Yes, candidate X, maybe so. This person is breaking the law. They bring the complaint. It's a Republican who's breaking the law. It's a, liberal watch group bringing the complaint. The 3 Republicans vote not to bring an enforcement action. The 3 Democrats vote to bring an enforcement action. Since it's a stalemate, no enforcement action is brought. What the author is saying is that if no enforcement action is brought, that should mean that it's dismissed. It's no longer in consideration for any action.
It has to have a 4th vote, otherwise stalemate, 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 stalemate. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And so you have the 3 Republicans who are just not voting to go forward on, almost anything. He addresses that in the article by saying that they're not overly aggressive about enforcing it. And I think that certainly is the case, that they're not overly enforcing any campaign finance laws right now. The way that the 3 Democrats on the commission are protesting or sort of fighting back against that is by refusing to defend the FEC when the FEC gets sued. So you have this watchdog group that's coming up saying this is a violation of campaign finance law. You have the commission, 3 no's, 3 yeses, nothing happens. Then the complainant, the watchdog group, can sue the FEC for not doing their job and enforcing campaign finance law. The FEC is one of the few organizations in the US government that does its own litigation. The Department of Justice does not do its litigation. So the 6 commissioners have to vote on whether or not they're going to defend themselves against this lawsuit that the theoretical watchdog group filed against them, trying to make them do their job. Right now, the Democrats are not voting to defend the FEC in several cases, which means that essentially the FEC is not showing up in court to defend themselves. And that's part of what the author is talking about ending here.
Do you have any insight, since you seem to know everything, because I'm learning more from you than reading this chapter for sure, about the Democrat whose term expired in 2007? Like, how is she still on the commission? And I mean, I don't know that I'm upset about it, but I am a rule follower. And 2007 was boop, 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 almost 20 years ago. What is that about?
Right. Well, the rule for those commissioners is they can sit until another one is confirmed. And that's the rule so that there's never a majority of any one party on the commission. Now, these people are not being replaced, I think, mostly just because it's not a priority. They have to be confirmed by the Senate, and getting Senate confirmation for one of the folks on this commission is just not a priority for.
So this is not something like, my immediate response was like, oh my God, Biden has to fix this because Trump's going to do it when he gets into office. But this is not probably going to be a next 11-day priority.
No, I don't think so. And like I said, Trump could do something much worse with this commission. He could weaponize it by appointing people to the commission who are neither Democrats nor Republicans, but who, kowtow to him or align with a conservative ideology. This chapter doesn't recommend that. This chapter recommends basically that the FEC doesn't really do much of anything at all. They say that the FEC has almost been doing too much enforcement. And it's hard to, it really has not been very much enforcement. But essentially what the author would like to see happen is for the Federal Election Commission to do almost nothing when it comes to enforcement actions.
Perfect. Because the rules are too complicated.
Right. And that's a way that someone could defend themselves. And that would be under the DOJ. So another recommendation, the Department of Justice, another recommendation that they're making in this article is that in order to avoid the stalemate where you have the Democrats refusing to defend the FEC's decisions in court, is to have the Department of Justice take over and do that defense for them. So basically, the recommendations are all about making it easier to not enforce campaign finance laws.
Clear as mud. Why would that ever be a terrible idea? What is going on? Like, okay, so seriously, again, I'm embarrassed at how little I gleaned from this chapter based on everything that you just said. So I'm doing pretty good on the other chapters, but this one, wow, I did not know any of this because the chapter 1 doesn't talk about it and you have context. I didn't even know kind of like what to Google or research. So I guess my next question would be, do we have to wait until we get a Democratic president to fix these things? Because that could be a while. That could be a minute at this point. Number 2, if it wasn't a priority during Biden's, is that because there was a Republican Senate, or it's just not generally a priority because it's kind of at a stalemate as a commission? And I guess last question, and then I'm going to shut up again and get schooled yet again, is that what does your average regular person who maybe isn't super paying attention to politics, maybe is a registered voter and may or may not choose to vote, what do what do we need to what do we need to know?
Yeah. I may have forgotten your first question by the time we made to the last question.
Sorry, I do word clouds. Answer whatever you remember and I'll come up with something else.
Okay, well, so to kind of start with the last question and maybe work back to the beginning, possibly. A president can't fix this problem. This problem needs to be fixed with legislation. You've had two.
That's control of a House and a Senate, which has been a second. Got it.
Yep, exactly. And not just control, but a supermajority in order to get something like this passed. We know that Republicans are not interested in making it easier to vote or easier to run for office or anything like that. And so a voting reform bill is not going to happen with the with the consent of very many Republicans at all. And that's what we need is an overall reform bill. We need something that reforms not only campaign finance law, which you'll notice that in this chapter he talks about how complicated the rules are and how hard they are to understand. He doesn't recommend trying to push for clearer rules or clearer laws, and that's what we really need is a comprehensive voting and elections package.
Mm-hmm. I would think that, so like your average person, me being a dipshit, that I count as an average person. If I didn't even know what I didn't know, now that I know what this is, number one, it seems like it might be something kind of important to pay attention to, because there's a possibility the Trump's administration is going to make potentially 5 suggestions, which according to the rules have to be 2 Democrats, there can't be more than 3 people from the same party. So in theory, 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats. If there's an independent, then that's a different story, but there can't be more than 3 from the same party. If that comes up, that's what we're talking about here. But it's likely not to come up because this particular administration and Congress are not really keen on beefing up election laws, election investigations, because political speech, political activity by citizens, candidates, or parties, which I think this is directly related to like misinformation. And there's a constant kind of trope about how it is not the government's responsibility to control for misinformation or disinformation campaigns. Seems like it could be, but they don't think it is. And then any kind of voluntary membership organizations are absolved from any kind of responsibility for the influence they may have on public policy issues, because it's not their fault that somebody else had an idea based on what they did.
Right. Well, and they definitely try to paint this as a First Amendment issue, and it is a First Amendment issue to the extent that political spending is considered political speech under our current laws, and that corporations are considered entities that have a constitutional right to political speech, and that it can't be arbitrarily limited by the government. That's kind of the framework that they're talking about this within, to try to make the case for not enforcing these laws as much as possible. The other thing that's noteworthy in here is that, yeah, they talk about membership organizations and they talk a little bit about, associations and unions and whatnot. But really what we're talking about here when it comes to massive campaign finance is corporations and billionaires.
Yeah.
Both of whom have a constitutional right to make as much, to do as much independent expenditure in order to elect candidates as they want to. Right.
I was trying to check my notes because I'm remembering something and now I can't remember it. But on that note, I want to particularly point out that the idea that a business's sole responsibility is to a shareholder, thank you, Milton Friedman, is like the ultimate return on investment responsibility only, It is only secondary to shareholder return on investment when we start talking about like justice, the environment, compliance, community development, betterment for the welfare. All that is like way, way, way later. And I think that it's very easy to forget that trope unless, of course, you are choosing to read this document, because in every single chapter it is anti-China and very, very pro-business, but only in the ways that are pro-Republican businesses.
Right. And looking at this last election, there was about $3 billion in super PAC money spent. That's a whole lot of money being spent. And while it is being regulated, it's not being regulated very much. And the enforcement mechanism primarily is the FEC. And the FEC has been more or less deadlocked. So yeah, that's a problem that probably can't be solved anytime real soon. Like I said, there have been bipartisan laws passed. The McCain-Feingold Act in 2002 was, the last big one, a bipartisan campaign finance reform act. We need to do that again. It's gotten a little bit harder to get bipartisan consensus. So many dogs. I'm just surrounded by a protective array of dogs just in case.
Me too. If it's not going to be if it's not going to be the Heritage Foundation, it's going to be our crew of rescue dogs.
True.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, you were saying something, but I think the most important thing to understand is that I can hear people being mad at me for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. There is activism involved in doing nothing. So like when the 3 Democrats have decided that they are not going to protect the FEC, that they're not doing something, and that is a form of activism. And so I'm not saying to stay ignorant, but I do think that there is potential organizing power to acknowledge what it would mean by not doing something, not relinquishing the seat, why it is under prioritized, and why Senate is likely not going to put this in their top 10 things to do. And you were talking before we were so rudely interrupted by an adorable dog that I love. There is real reform that's on the table that would make this even easier. Probably my biggest lesson, or possibly maybe reminder, is that sometimes doing nothing is actually important. Like that doing nothing is also an act of resistance. And so I just want to name that the 3 Democrats on the Federal Election Commission who have decided not to defend the Federal Election Commission when being sued for not doing things that they should be doing based on the regulation. And this particular chapter is doing nothing but asking for those regulations to be even more loose, for the FEC itself to become even less independent. This is something to be mindful of, or to be paying attention if it comes up, which it probably won't, because it's probably going to be a pretty low priority. And they kind of got a sweet deal going on, but it's going to have to get through Senate confirmation with a supermajority. Do you have something to add or correct in my probably romantic delusion that I learned something?
No, I don't have anything to correct. I would add, when it comes to what you can do, this is one of the things where, it seems very far away from everyday life, and it seems like, and it is really the case, that there's not a whole lot you can do to influence, but there are some things, and one would be supporting the organizations that are suing the FEC for enforcement. The Campaign Legal Center is one. There are at least 7 others. Maybe I can send you a list after this call.
Okay.
But supporting those organizations, encouraging your local politicians to have campaign finance reform in their platform, basically making this issue more of an issue. I think that people tend to think that it's impossible to make our elections less corrupt because there is so much money and so little regulation. But it is possible. Like I said, it's happened before at least twice in 1971 and in 2002. It can happen again. Keeping it in people's minds as an important part of protecting the democratic process is valuable.
I really appreciate that. And I didn't even ask you about this earlier. And if it's too long of an answer, just say that's for another day. But is this also related to Citizens United?
Yeah.
And is that part of the reason, like the Citizens United case in Supreme Court that let corporate money anonymously go into political campaigns at unfettered, unregulated levels? That was such a win that this has become less of a priority. Was that the connection?
I don't know if I would say that necessarily, but Citizens United is one of a number of Supreme Court decisions that have, eroded the good laws protecting campaign finance integrity that we have passed, and it's not the only one. There are a few Supreme Court decisions that erode that act. And of course, we shouldn't expect anything good coming from the Supreme Court anytime soon, which is another reason why, having legislation about this is important. Basically, Citizens United is just one more step toward deregulating money in elections as much as possible. It's not, FEC is who that case was against, and they lost. So there you go.
And they probably lost because they didn't have anybody defending them.
No. They did. No, they were in that case. They fought
were.
that
This
case.
is before. Okay, got it. See, this is what I mean, people. You got to keep Googling. Okay,
Very obscure.
Bridget, thank you forever for your time and for all of the amazing, incredible work that you do. And please tell your dogs I said hello. And I really appreciate this.
Shut up.
I really, really appreciate this. I'm sorry I'm so dumb, but that is part of the reason why your election work matters so much, because there's a lot of dummies out there.